All right, how's everyone doing today? What? I'm doing fine. It's surprising no one said anything. Surprising no one said anything.
What? Oh, I'm so sorry.
I did it one year and everybody was like, oh my gosh, this is wrong. Go home. All right. So how'd the reading go? Fun?
Yeah.
Okay.
I feel like the style of the book is just annoying.
Yeah?
I don't know. I feel like it's good to understand the concepts, but it just seems I don't know if it's it's not slang, but I don't know, it just seems very casual.
It's very out of pocket.
Annoys me.
Examples are so out of pocket.
Yeah.
I will say that I think it works a lot better as an audiobook because if you listen to it, it comes off a little bit better. I think, because I've listened to the audiobook of it. So he has a good voice too, the person that narrates it. I don't think it's the same person that wrote it that narrates it. But, all right, so chapters 11 through 16. A few things that I want to talk about that isn't explicitly stated in the writing or in the book. One has to do with a concept that's known as the Red Queen hypothesis. Any idea what the Red Queen is? I think I heard it. Yeah, it refers to Alice in Wonderland. So Alice in Wonderland, there's a quote. Now here you see it takes all the running you can do to keep in the same place. So it's kind of like a treadmill where the faster and faster you run, you don't actually make any more movement because you're kind of just going in the same place. But if you'd stop running, you'd fly backwards off the treadmill. So that's where this hypothesis comes from. And it has to do with a species' ability to adapt. So essentially, the idea is that continue adaptation between two competing species is necessary or one of those species will go extinct. Now, for us, the species that we are specifically referring to are pathogens or parasites. So the parasites that we are exposed to include the bacteria and viruses, as well as certain protists and fungi that can ultimately, that ultimately, because they're parasites, use you to the detriment of your well-being. And so the parasites are adapted to you, and they can become better adapted to you and cause a greater disease, and so you have to adapt to overcome them. There is an advantage that parasites have when it comes to this. So what advantage would parasites have over us when it comes to adaptation over time? Okay, so this has to do with reproduction. So the mechanism for adaptation is being able to reproduce and produce offspring that are genetically different from you in various ways. Parasites, I think you've noticed this, are able to reproduce much faster than you guys are. I don't think any of you have kids yet at this point, so you guys have not successfully reproduced and added to the adaptation potential as humans. Meanwhile, coronavirus, bacteria, the flu, these will reproduce rapidly and undergo mutations and then selection such that they are going to be better adapted for you. So these changes come down to mutations that ultimately are going to change the way proteins interact with each other or other molecules. Either the protein is going to have different activity, higher activity, lower activity, or won't interact with another molecule that it normally would interact with. And this, in turn, allows the organism to sometimes be better suited for whatever niche it's trying to occupy. In this case, the niche is your body, and it's trying to consume you slowly. And so they have this advantage because you can't really, you can acclimate to something, but to really adapt to something, it has to happen over generations. And so they would have the advantage because their reproduction is significantly faster than the host. So what do we do about this? Well, fortunately, your body has an adaptive immune system. So while you may not be able to reproduce, have mutations that make you more fit for your environment, your immune system actually does go through cycles of cell reproduction and actually can go through mutations known as somatic hypermutations that are going to lead to better fitness and a greater ability to fight off the bacteria. So without your adaptive immune system, the parasites would probably win this, but the adaptive immune system does help us kind of move along. That being said, the function of bacteria, viruses, fungi, etc., oftentimes will rely on specific proteins that can't undergo drastic change. So there are certain molecules that are common to most or all bacteria and most or all viruses and most, if not all, fungi, parasites, etc., that if those proteins change too much, suddenly the organism is going to be less fit. An example of this is the bacteria Flagella. Some eukaryotic organisms also have flagella, and certain cells of humans will have flagella as well, but they are different from bacteria flagella. So the flagella is going to be specific to bacteria. Certain cell wall components are also another example. Something that is another danger sign for your immune system is the free-floating DNA. So your DNA should be inside of cells, inside their nucleus. If it's not, that's usually indicative of something else going on. Either the cells are damaged in some way and losing their DNA, or the that has some sort of invader that has released DNA into the environment. So all of these are signals that are going to be innate, can't change drastically, that your body has the ability to recognize. So these receptors are known as pattern recognition receptors. So they recognize specific patterns that are shared by many different organisms. The book talked about a specific type of pattern recognition receptor, which was the what? Those are cells. The receptors are proteins that are on the. Those are. Yeah, those are small chemical messages. The toll-like receptors. Toll means great in German. So these are great receptors. Ultimately, they are going to recognize proteins that are secreted by bacteria or viruses, and they recognize these patterns and tell you that something is afoot. So this is one of the ways that the immune system first recognize that an invasion has begun. All right, so we're going to start with the innate immune system. Toll-like receptors are part of the innate immune system because it recognizes pathogens innately without having to learn anything about them. Another component of the innate immune system is the complement system. So what is a complement system? Cells, tissues, proteins, DNA.
The ones that are smaller than the cells and they work with them in response to them.
So the complement system, yes, proteins are smaller than cells, is a set of cells that the system works, that work together to stop invading microorganisms. There are a lot of proteins involved. There's over 30 different proteins that are a part of the immune system. The most important one in getting the response off is C3. So C3 is sort of the initiating signal in a lot of cases to get the complement system going. Once it gets going, it can have several different functions. So what are some of the things that the complement system does?
Marks intruders.
Okay. So it puts specific markers on the invaders. What is the benefit of marking the invaders?
There's like some that mark them, and then there's the other ones. They're like, this is a thing, and then they tell other cells that it's happening, and then
Okay.
or like macrophages or something, and then they also go and help.
So what do the macrophages do?
Or do they also tell them the dendritic cells that something's happening?
So what I was looking for is that the macrophages, because they have more than one function, but the macrophages are going to consume cells, right? Big eaters.
Mm-hmm.
So mark invaders, there's a couple of things that this accomplishes. So first of all, it will inactivate or impede them. I think the book uses the scenario where you have a bunch of flies kind of flying at you, constantly sticking to you. It's kind of annoying. It's hard to get stuff done if you're being constantly bombarded by these small, annoying things. Unlike flies, I think unlike flies anyway, the marking can also lead to opsonization. What does it mean to be opsonized? Labeling, is that what you said? So what it's labeled for?
Destruction.
Destruction or sort of. So yeah, it leads to that. We're skipping a step though. So opsonization, you can think of that as sort of like the salt shaker effect, where if you have something that's pretty bland, you put some salt on it, tastes a little bit better. Something that's opsonized is something that's a little bit easier to get phagocytized. So this basically means that it's making it tastier, and so it increases phagocytosis. Forget the T that's in the middle there. In addition to marking in the invader, well, another thing that it happens when it marks invaders, and this is kind of what you were referencing, is that it can actually rip holes in them. Specifically, it can open up holes in the membrane of the individuals. In addition to marking invaders, the complement protein is also going to help recruit immune cells. So it'll help guide the immune system to where the infection is actually occurring, such that the immune system can actually function where there is an infection. So how this works, essentially you have all these complement proteins just floating around in your body, inertly not having anything going wrong with them. Spontaneously, the C3 can break apart, and when it does break apart, it forms two other molecules known as C3A and C3B. That's as deep as we're going to get to go in the naming convention of it. One of those pieces is going to start binding to the membranes and opsonizing it and inactivating the organism. The other one's going to go recruiting other immune cells, such as the macrophages and the neutrophils, to phagocytize the molecule. So it's going to opsonize them and also bring the molecule or bring the cells that need to do the phagocytosis to the site of infection. This can be spontaneous, or it can be initiated by antibodies. There's other ways that this can occur as well. The antibody response is kind of more alongside the once the adaptive immune system has been initiated, whereas the spontaneous response is more of the innate immune system and how it is functioning. Now, the C3 is kind of like a grenade that you don't necessarily want going off all the time. So C3 will only stay activated if it has a specific target that it can bind to on the invader. Commonly, this is going to be a specific marker to bacteria or other invaders that will damage the cells. And so it recognizes these, binds to it, and stays activated and initiates this cascade. So ultimately, this will cascade and amplify the response if an invader is present. But these will spontaneously deactivate when there are no, that's an invader, that little dot there, when there's no invader. Your body also has ways of inactivating the complement system. You don't want the complement system, as I mentioned just a minute ago, to be going off if there's nothing wrong, because that's going to lead to systemic inflammation. The neutrophils are a type of cell that comes in and causes a lot of damage to the tissues as well as the invader. So you don't want to activate neutrophils if you don't have to. So the cells need to deactivate these components if it doesn't need them. All right, so we are now going to be talking about how the innate immune system is connected to the adaptive immune system. And there's a cell that is a particularly important player in this. That cell is the dendritic cell. So it's a dendritic cell because the dendrite is sort of like a starfish-shaped cell, and that's what the name essentially means, is it refers to the shape of the cell. This can get a bit confusing because there's more than one type of dendritic cell in your body, and the dendritic cells aren't necessarily related in that they don't come from the same cell lineage or have the same function. They just have the same morphology, and so they're called the dendritic cells. The dendritic cells are going to come in and essentially bring in reinforcements if the initial defenses cannot hand it. So dendritic cells do a few different things. First, they identify the type of invader. What type the invader is. They are going to identify where the invasion is occurring. And they are going to activate the adaptive immune system. Where does the adaptive immune system get activated? Okay. In the lymphoid organs, and really the secondary lymphoid organs, the primary ones being the bone marrow and the thymus, where the B cells and T cells are initially produced and mature initially. So both of them are produced in the bone marrow. The T cells go to the thymus and mature a little bit. Those are your primary ones because they're producing the lymphocytes. The secondary lymphoid tissues are things like your spleen, your lymph nodes, tonsils, mucosal associated lymphoid tissues or MALTs that ultimately are going to be where the B and T cells mature. So the lymphoid organs this is where the dendritic cells migrate to. And they're going to activate your white blood cells, your B and T cells. they do this only after the dendritic cells have been activated. So the dendritic cells sort of act as sentries. They're going to be located near surfaces that might be exposed to invaders. And then once they have been exposed to the invaders, they're going to sample the external environment, reach a critical level, and then migrate into the lymphoid tissues. So it will display the external environment proteins to the lymphocytes. So essentially the dendritic cell will sample the environment. Once it finds something that is foreign, and usually it has to find a certain level of things that are foreign, that it knows that it needs to call for reinforcements, then it will stop sampling the environment and start moving to a nearby lymph node. It needs to stop sampling the environment for a few reasons. So if it continued to sample the environment, what issues would arise as it migrated toward the lymph node? What is the dendritic cell ultimately going to do? Activate the adaptive immune system. And what does it do when it activates the adaptive immune system? It will need, so the adaptive immune cells that are activated, some of them are going to go back to the site of the invasion. There's other things that happen as well, but that's going to be a big part of it. And what else? Well, what's related to that? What are the cells that are going back there? What do they need to know? Brooke, go get me food. Go get me food. No, I want something precise. Go get it for me.
So I need to know what you need.
Okay, you want to know what kind of food I want?
Yes.
Okay. So the immune cells need to know not what kind of food, but we'll come back to that. They need not what kind of food, but what kind of invader, right? So they need to know if it's a bacteria, is it a fungi, or whatever. If it keeps sampling while it's going to the immune system, one of the things that's going to happen is that it's going to start diluting the signal that was telling you what type of invader it was. All right, so I want ice cream. Go get me ice cream. I like vanilla.
Okay.
But I only like it from a certain place.
So I need to know where.
You also need to know where to go. If they keep sampling as they go to the lymph node, what are they going to pick up along the way? Signals for all the location in between there. But they need to know ultimately where they came from. So the dendritic cell needs to stop sampling because it needs to have a snapshot of what the invader actually is and where the invader came from. Just like you need to know what kind of ice cream I like and where I want that ice cream from. You don't need to get me ice cream. It's okay. But if you bring one ice cream someday, I like vanilla. May or may not pass the class if you don't bring me ice cream. Just saying. So the sampling of the external environment is only going to happen where the initial invasion is. Then the dendritic cell travels through the lymphatic system. What is the lymphatic system?
Kind of like your circulatory system, but not with blood.
Okay, so it's really a second set of plumbing in the body. You have your circulatory system that is really transporting oxygen and, to a degree, nutrients around to all the different cells. How does the oxygen get places? Via your blood vessels, via the blood in your blood vessels specifically. What causes the blood in your blood vessels to move? Your heart, right? So you have an active pump here. Do we have an active pump with the lymphatic system? We don't. You do have your muscles and those sort of things as you move along help to kind of squeeze the lymphatic vessels, kind of like you'd squeeze a test tube back to your back through circulation, but there's not an active pump that's pushing things through. So this is more of a passive. This is a low pressure system, something that things are going to move through a little bit more slowly than the circulatory system, which is good because it gives cells a chance to actually capture what's going on with your immune system. So the lymphatic system is, to a degree, supplied by your blood because some of the fluid is going to leak out of your blood cells or blood vessels and not return to your blood vessels. And so that is going to be collected then in your lymph vessels. They travel to the lymph nodes, also the spleen, the thymus, tonsils, different structure. It's going to be responsible for transporting. It's a fluid, so it transports water. Damaged and dead cells. Invaders. Usually dead, sometimes alive. Pieces of those invaders. Those pieces of invaders sometimes function as chemical signals, but other chemical signals are going to be moving through here as well. And then your immune system is also going to be sort of like the superhighway that a lot of your immune cells will travel on. In addition to this, not really relevant to this class, but it is part of the lipid transport system, how lipids move throughout the body. They first, when you absorb fat, has to go through the lymphatic tissue before it gets into the blood circulation. All right, so we have the lymphatic system, and then we are going to bring the dendritic cells to the lymphocytes, to the lymph nodes. The lymph nodes, the spleen, and all of those secondary lymphoid organs are going to be naive until they've been activated by something, and that's going to trigger the adaptive immune response. So part of the adaptive immune response that what's sort of going to kick it into gear is the action of the helper T cells, which are oftentimes abbreviated as TH cell. So the helper T cells, these are going to aid in the activation of B cells, macrophages, and other types of T cells that are known as cytotoxic T cells or cytotoxic lymphocytes. There's another name for those. So the dendritic cells are what's responsible for activating the T helper cells. The T helper cells then are going to aid in the activation of these other cells that ultimately are going to kick the immune system into response. Function of the B cells. So macrophages are going to eat things. The cytotoxic T cells are going to be cells that are going to trigger other things to essentially destroy themselves. The B cells, their primary function is to secrete antibodies, which I am abbreviating as ABS. So what's an antibody? Broadly speaking, what class of molecule would you classify an antibody as? Fat, carbohydrate, protein, nucleic acid? Protein. So they are proteins. They are going to be similar to the complement proteins in their effect on the cells. So they are going to basically help attack invaders. They're different in that they are going to be more specific to the invaders that they are going to attack. So they're specific. The antibodies will trigger opsonization. You can also have neutralization. So basically, opsonizing it makes the bacterium or invader more likely to be consumed, whereas neutralization makes it harder for the pathogen to function. So a neutralizing antibody is one that will bind to, say, a virus and prevent the virus from entering cells, for example. What's interesting is not only do antibodies kind of aid the function of cells, they can also help complement. They can help fix complement so that the complement system is activated. So it can aid in opsonization in that regard. One thing that I forgot to mention about the complement system is that it can form a membrane attack complex, which does exactly what it sounds like. Puts holes in membranes. So I meant to mention that earlier. That's not necessarily specific to the antibody response, but to complement in general. What's interesting about antibodies is that your body essentially has enough cells in it to recognize enough immune cells that are specific to any potential invader that you would ever recognize. So the adaptive immune system really has the potential to respond to any type of virus, bacteria, fungi, etc., that you ever have been, ever will be, or ever will be exposed to. However, it takes some time for the immune system to actually build up this response to the level that it can actually react. It can't always be on this high level of alert. You'd have systemic inflammation for one, which would cause problems, but it would also consume a lot of resources for the bacteria, viruses that you never are exposed to, and therefore you would have a lot of wasted resources if it was always at this high activated level. So that's why you have small amounts that need activated and built upon for that. Questions? Anything interesting that you guys noted in your reading that we didn't cover? All right, for next time, read chapter 17 to 23. Homework. So the homework should be the reading for immune from last week. And it was chapter 7. Is that what we went through in Alan? Or was it chapter 8? 7. So 10 bullet points from both. The homework's not up yet, but I'm going to do that as soon as I finish class. So, questions?
So that's chapter 5 through 10?
Chapter, 5 through 10. And then quiz Monday will be over the stuff that I put on Anki yesterday. So you should update your Anki cards and look at those. You guys should also have the link to the Anki worksheet, right? If you want to go through and look at them. You can see I have the dates that I added stuff to it. So I may add stuff between now and Monday, but it won't be on the quiz. So it'll be only the stuff from 331, which is essentially chapter 5, I think, or chapter 6 of Alan. All right. You guys have a good weekend.
Me too.